Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of Geopolitical Analysis at Cognitive Investments. It is always a pleasure to welcome back Kamran Bokhari, who is the senior director of the Eurasian Security and Prosperity Portfolio at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Back to the forecast. Kamran, as longtime listeners of this podcast will know, is a good friend, and he's come on several times, and we're happy to have him on this week to discuss the situation in Pakistan. Kamran really also opened my eyes to some of the issues in the South Caucasus. I had some awareness of what was going on there, but he really added some richness to it there too. Kamran has really been focusing on Central Asia recently, and we're going to have him back on to do just an episode on Central Asia itself, not least because we're recording here on May 18th. China had a big summit in Central Asia this week, and China seems to be muscling into the region as Russia is distracted with its ongoing war in Ukraine. But we will have Kamran back on in a couple weeks to talk Central Asia. For now, I'm pushing this episode out as quickly as we can. It might mean that the cadence is bunched up a little bit here, so you're going to get episodes from me almost daily here for the next, or you might have gotten episodes from me daily here for the past couple of days. But the world is just changing so fast right now, we can't sit on this episode because Pakistan, well, I'll let you listen to the podcast itself, but it's a very, very dire situation there. So, listeners, if you want to know more about the knowledge platform, the CI knowledge platform that we rolled out a couple weeks ago, please check out our website, cognitive.investments, or email me directly at jacob@cognitive.investments. We are offering access to our research and to also one-on-one consulting services for a small select group of clients. If that sounds like you, if you need help on managing geopolitics, please reach out to us. If you want to have more information about our wealth management services, please reach out to me at jacob@cognitive.investments. If you haven't left a review of the podcast or a rating of the podcast and you're a new listener, please consider taking 10 seconds out of your day to just put the 5 stars or 2 stars, however many stars you think we deserve, just put them in. It's immensely helpful for us. And last but not least, if you have suggestions for guests, good books that you read lately, a new recipe that you think I should try out, again, it's jacob@cognitive.investments. So, without further ado, let's get on to it. Cheers and see you out there. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. Well, this is not meant to be a proper exercise, Kamran. The podcast has always tried to be conversations with friends, imbibing some beverage with the microphones just so happen to be on. And I wish we were doing it in person, but I appreciate you making the time to come back on. It sounds like you've got a very busy schedule.
Yeah, just too much happening, and then there's daddy duty. My daughter's in 10th grade, and she takes up a lot of my bed.
Well, this is going to be a terrible segue, but what's taking up a lot of global bandwidth in the world right now is your home country of Pakistan. I didn't know who else I wanted to talk to about this because I know some things about Pakistan and I've been trying to keep abreast of the situation there, but it's confusing even for somebody whose life is about geopolitics to figure out what's going on there. Just sort of the lay of the land, and tell me, and maybe I'll give the listeners a very brief lay of the land, Kamran, and you can sort of help me as we go from there. Imran Khan was this cricketer populist guy who became Pakistan's prime minister. At first, the military seemed to like him. Then the military and Khan soured on each other. He eventually gets the boot. And while he gets the boot, also Pakistan's dealing with an economic crisis, with a balance of payment crisis and the flooding catastrophe and high prices of food and energy, all these other things. So the new government trying to get funds from the IMF, Khan is still out there, politicking and trying to get his PTI party going on. But in the last couple of weeks, things have really escalated. So Khan gets arrested by Pakistani police forces for apparently not cooperating with an investigation into corruption allegations. Then there are protests in which apparently Pakistani military installations get attacked by protesters. Then the Pakistani Supreme Court comes in and says, well, Khan's arrest was illegal. You need to release him. He is subsequently arrested. And as we're recording here on Thursday, May 18th, according to Khan, Pakistani security forces are outside his home waiting to arrest him again. This will publish on Monday, probably. So we'll have a couple days between now and then. For all I know, he'll get arrested again and released again between then. But maybe just help us sort through the lay of the land. I think it's probably too simplistic to just say this is about the military versus Khan. There's the current government, there's the judiciary, there's the political parties themselves. There's just a lot of noise here. So help us at the broad outsets. Was anything I said wrong just now? And sort of where do you think we need to watch going forward to understand what's happening in Pakistan?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well, Jacob. Look, I think that the old ways of looking at Pakistan, or sort of the old net assessment, to use an old terminology, is perhaps no longer valid because we're in, undiscovered country, uncharted territory here. Look, the military has always produced proxies, both political and militant. And the experiment didn't go well, then, they know how to deal with it. Yes, with difficulty, but in the end, they do, the military as an institution remains insular to the experiment, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening now, before I jump into what's happening now, just take, for example, the Pakistan Muslim League of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. He was a proxy of the military not too long ago, 25, 30 years ago. And he was brought to power to counter former Prime Minister, the late Benazir Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party. So the result of that was, yes, you countered, the Pakistan People's Party by creating a new party and backing it. But then that party goes rogue. So then what do you do? Hence the Musharraf coup of 1999. And during the Musharraf era, you will recall both political parties were out in the wilderness. And once after Musharraf was gone, or actually even before he was formally gone, both parties made their way back in. Mm-hmm. If you look at the militant proxies that the Pakistani military has cultivated over the decades, they have, there's been blowback on that. 80,000 to 100,000 people have lost their lives in insurgency that ran somewhere between 2006-07 all the way to 2015-16. And after a lot of blood and treasure being spent, they got a handle on it, or they were able to contain it. The problem's still there, but it's more manageable right now. And this is all pre-Taliban coming to power. With the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, that whole calculus is also needs to be revisited, and we need to reassess what's going on there. But Imran Khan was brought in. Imran Khan has been a political force for 25, 27 years, and it wasn't until the 2011 or roundabout there that the military took interest in him as a third force to break the duopoly. So first they created a duopoly, then they're going to break the duopoly. That experiment took me a few years to, put the party together, build it, cultivate it. And in 2018, through very clever electoral engineering, they brought Khan to power. Now, guess what? That proxy went rogue as well. There's a certain logic here. If you are a political party that has managed to come to power with the help of the establishment, the military-led establishment, you will not always be, on the proverbial same page with your patron. Your calculus is different, their calculus is different, and at some point, the honeymoon period is over. And you find yourself at odds over, things that seemingly look like tactical issues. But beneath those tactical issues is a broader problem, which is that a divergence of interests. And therefore, it's only inevitable that you run afoul of your former benefactor. Now, the uniqueness of Khan is that Khan actually, and his PTI, it wasn't just one of those run-of-the-mill political proxies. It was a proxy that had deep relations with the ecosystem of the military, with the broader social fabric of the military, the retirees, their families, and so on and so forth, which makes up a good chunk of the middle class. And so, for the longest time, these were allies. There's sort of for those who sort of among your listeners who understand what's happening in Turkey, it's kind of like what happened between the Gulen and the AKP. They came together to defeat the Kemalists. Once that was over, it was between them. And I think that's what has happened. Their ecosystems overlap. And what Khan has achieved, is that he basically penetrated through what was a largely insular military institution and its broader ecosystem. And there was lots of support, and there still is, for Khan from within, the serving officers in junior ranks, mid ranks, high ranks. It's an opaque institution. There's the fog of war. We cannot tell for sure, what is the scale of that, precise scale of that support. But he didn't come this far by attacking head on and calling out by name officers, the army chief, the head of the ISI, and his associates so publicly, something no other politician has ever done before. And until now, he was getting away with it. And I think that is the major shift that has happened in sort of the Pakistani political system, is that for the first time, the military's own ecosystem, its own body politic, has been contaminated by a proxy in such a significant way. Now, this doesn't mean that Khan has overwhelmed the military, but it poses a significant problem, which would explain to a large extent why it took them a year, actually 13 months, to actually crack down on the guy, because they were, basically laying him, giving him a wide berth to vent his anger and whatnot, let him talk. And, eventually the temperature became too high. And, with the incident of the attack on military facilities on May 9th, after the arrest of Khan, was just sort of the trigger for this thing to come to blows.
Well, where does Khan go from here? Because it seems like picking a battle with the Pakistani military, for as popular or for as much as he's been able to convert some of the body politic to his point of view. I mean, the Pakistani military is stronger, and they haven't just surrounded his house with police. They're arresting supporters. They're probably suppressing dissent. I mean, if the Pakistani military feels like it is threatened, like the proxy has gotten beyond itself, won't the Pakistani military sort of cut off its own arm to cure the patient? I mean, I feel like this is not going to end well for Khan, but he's not acting like a man who thinks that he's in danger. He's acting like a man who he seems to think he's holding the cards, or at least he's acting that way. Maybe it's an act.
So yes and no. He does think that he holds the cards. He doubles down. I mean, he's not a quitter. He's not one to throw in the towel. He's very competitive. People who have followed his career, particularly his cricket career, know that very well. Many people may not recall or even know about this, but he actually mounted a coup against his own captain during his cricket years, and became captain. So that's for those who have lived long enough and remember those days, or at least pay attention to cricket, are well aware of that. But there is that side to him, and he's not going to throw in the towel. He firmly believes that he is the one righteous in this battle. He sees himself as fighting the good cause. In other words, he's actually drunk his own Kool-Aid. But more importantly, he thinks that if he keeps at it, he will eventually win. He sees himself having come to a point where, yes, there'll be setbacks like the one that's happening right now, with lots of defections from his party, happening as we speak. Lots of party members, associates condemning the violence by the party. And this isn't happening organically. This is this is something that, prompted by the military because they have influence, and they're basically going to these people and say, your man is out of control and you got to decide which side you're on because this has gone too far. So despite that, I think he thinks from his point of view that, right now there's a setback, but eventually I'm going to come out looking good. And he's just not one of those people who is going to throw in the towel. So in other words, the military did business with an actor that was very atypical from the type of people they're used to. The typical politicians, those who are feudal in nature, come from, large agrarian holdings to, major businesses and whatnot. I'm talking about, the usual suspects or the old class of politicians. This guy's very different, and he's given them a tough time. But at the end of the day, you're right. Look, you can't come to power on the back of the military, and then within, say, what has it been, 4 years, gain enough power to turn against them and hope to succeed. No, obviously you're going to be cut down to size. I think he's seen a setback. We're not sure what's going to happen to him. What he has riding for himself, and something I should have mentioned earlier, is that he's the most popular politician in the country.
Yep.
And it wouldn't be an exaggeration that if elections were held today, that he would, I'm not willing to say that he may get a 2/3 majority, but that is the fear of the establishment, that if he gets that, then it'll be much more difficult for them to handle the Khan. But he will, win a comfortable majority. And that's the problem. And that he thinks that is his winning card, and he's going to leverage and milk that for all it's worth. He's not going to give up. He may be forced into a position that is uncomfortable, but eventually he's 70 years old, probably a little bit over 70. He sees himself, he's building a legacy for himself. He wants to be remembered as a great leader of the country. So this is a man you can't wheel and deal with in the normal way that the Pakistani military has gotten used to wheeling and dealing with the usual politicians.
I have to confess that when I'm 70 years old, I hope that I'm on a beach somewhere drinking little drinks with little umbrellas in them. I have a hard time with all these politicians, Erdogan and Biden and Trump running around. They're old and I wouldn't want to do it. If I was as successful as these guys, I'd be somewhere else, but maybe that's not why I'm a politician. Kamran, if I could zero in a little bit more on what you just said, because I don't have a good sense of this. Why is Khan so popular? Because it's not like he's presided over a period of particularly good economic policy for Pakistan. If anything, the Pakistan economy, which should be actually really well suited for this multipolar world that we're entering into. Pakistan has great strategic location, hundreds of millions of people, well educated, lots of natural resources, and yet Pakistan's running out of money. They can't afford energy. All these things are happening to them, and they can't take advantage. They look across the border at India, and the distance between India and even Bangladesh and Pakistan continues to expand. Those two countries have a lot of economic dynamism that Pakistan just doesn't have, and it's not like Khan changed anything there. So what is the source of his popularity? And maybe you'll go back to the Turkey comparison, which, Erdogan at first gave good economic policy, but then he's developed this emotional bond with a large part of the Turkish electorate that votes for him in spite of their own economic interests. Is that what Khan has? He has this emotional bond with the people. I have trouble sort of parsing through why people are so enamored with him or have such feelings of loyalty towards him.
So that's a great question. And the answer is that people don't necessarily love him or support him for who he is. But he is perceived by a vast majority of people. And keep in mind that, the bulge is growing in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
There, at least from what I've seen, as many as 18 million new voters who are going to be participating in the next election. That entire strata of society is sick of the usual politicians, is sick of the military's intervention in politics, and they see in Khan hope. So yes, he hasn't delivered, but then the question is, look, he wasn't allowed to deliver, even when he was in power. People can point to him being encumbered by the army, by the intelligence services. He kept saying, look, I'm going to put away and lock up all these people, the crooks and the thieves, basically his political opponents, but yet he couldn't. And so people have sympathy for him, that he's fighting their fight. They really believe in what he says. And he's been really, really savvy in terms of being able to build a narrative. He's Pakistan's Trump. I mean, he has his loyal following. And then there are a large number of people who may not love him, but they hate the other side. And they say, hey, we gave a chance to everybody else and more than once. So let this guy come in. And then there are those who say, if he wins because we want democracy in this country. So let it be. This is everything, all of this benefits him. So he's riding this wave. So he's not, he hasn't delivered anything. In fact, on delivery, one of the arguments that is made is that if he wasn't thrown out of office with the vote of no confidence in April of 2022, he would not be so popular today. Plus, there's the political machine that he put together. He has appropriated the narratives that historically were developed by the military and the intelligence services, and he is, his machine is probably the most efficient when it comes to the use of social media and narrative building. They're, great info operators, if you will, and so it's a latent sentiment, but it's also the leveraging of that sentiment through skillful. And his team is, a large number of young people who are ambitious, energetic, tech savvy, whereas the older political parties, they're like, dinosaurs, and they don't have comparable machines to go out. They're still doing politics the old way. So all of this explains his popularity. Just not so much love for him. There is that core cult-like, if you will, following. But on top of that, it is the hatred of everybody else that lets people gravitate towards him.
Yeah.
So directs people.
Well, where does Pakistan go from here, Kamran? I mean, there really hasn't been substantive change in this country for decades, half a century. I mean, it's basically just been the same story repeated over and over and over again with different characters. Is Pakistan just sort of condemned to this eternal return of the same bullshit forever? Or is there some kind of change that could happen with Pakistan in the context of this conflict? Could this get worse? Are we looking at a real civil conflict within the country? What are our signposts for going forward?
I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better, and a lot worse, because, let's just look at the financial needs of the country. Everybody has a different number, but it's safe to say that Pakistan needs at least $20 to $30 billion of assistance to get back on its feet. There's just not, the money's not there. Nobody is willing to cough up that amount of money, even collectively. There is no incentive. Look, United States, there are reasons why the United States historically aided Pakistan to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, because there was an interest. So in the first tranche of money, or the first period of close U.S.-Pakistani relations, is the 60s. The height of the Cold War, Pakistan is a frontline state. So Therefore, Pakistan becomes the beneficiary of a lot of U.S. financial assistance and military assistance. You fast forward another couple of decades, in the 1980s, you have the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that becomes the driver for yet another long period, 10 years, of a large infusion of financial assistance. You fast forward further to the Musharraf era between, 2001 and 2007, 8, you have the post 9/11 and its aftermath that becomes the basis for which the United States again pumps money. There is no basis for which there is no appetite in the United States to help out Pakistan. There's no reason. The world has changed. The United States has cut its losses in Afghanistan and has moved on. There is the Russian war in Ukraine. There is climate change. There is China. There are a host of other issues that just are sucking up the bandwidth. That's the United States. China. China has already poured, tens of billions of dollars in its signature BRI initiative called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and they're not seeing any return on their investment. In fact, they're looking at losses, And so if you're the Chinese and you're looking at this situation, would you want to invest more money here? No.
Nope.
Then if you go to the Arab states, the Saudis and the Emiratis, who are probably the most closest of allies of the Pakistanis, and they have a lot more influence in Pakistan than do the Chinese and the Americans. They're looking at this and saying, oh my God, what are we dealing with over here? Recently, the Saudi finance minister, and it was a hint to both Pakistan and Egypt, indirect statement, that we are no longer in the business of cutting checks. We will invest, but we want to see reforms. Who are they saying that to? They're saying that to the Pakistanis, because that's where, they just, I don't want to say a blank check, but something close to it, and say, okay, here, brother, you got problems again. Here, go solve your problems. That's over. So Pakistan's problems are not improving. Are growing larger. They're not being addressed. So that's a huge, huge dilemma for Pakistan. Then you've got, a Taliban-run Afghanistan. You don't have relations with India. If you had some trade relations, you could say, okay, maybe, we can work something out here. That's not happening. So where is this country going? I think, and I hate to say this, but I think that if the Pakistanis cannot get their act together, and soon, it's not beyond the pale to say that we're looking at a failed state situation.
A failed state with nuclear weapons, no less.
Had nuclear weapons, 240 plus million people.
Well,
Bordering two other nuclear weapon states, and Afghanistan and Iran.
Well, ironically, that might be the interest that actually does get the foreign or the international community involved here, because if suddenly, the Pakistani government is not there to take care of Pakistani nukes, that does have major global issues.
Yes. This is kind of like the Chinese strategy. If you want to go do business anywhere, you're China, you want to be able to go into a state that's malleable. A malleable state, by definition, is one that isn't very strong. Mm-hmm. The problem is the Chinese put in money, and it becomes even more weaker, and they lose, in other words, the Chinese are hoping that, ceteris paribus, nothing will change. All things being equal, everything will go on the same, and we're going to be able to make money. That doesn't happen. And we're seeing this, and even today there's an article in the press about how Chinese debt has led to, has had devastating effects on many countries, Pakistan included, Sri Lanka included. There's a mention of Mongolia, although I know very little about what that relationships look like. But the point is that if you're the United States and you're worried about nukes, what can you do? You need a partner in country. If the partner is at war with itself, and there is no coherent partner to work with, then who are you going to give money to? How are you going to do that? And let's say you are able to find the partner but past experience tells you that it's not worked, then, you don't really have a solution. So, and then we've never had in the history of the species a situation where a nuclear weapon state failed. The closest thing that comes to mind is the implosion of the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union imploded, it was replaced by the Russian Federation. Now, that reality is also changing, and we have to worry about, if a defeat in Ukraine leads to Russia destabilizing, what does that mean? And in the case of Pakistan, at least Russia, there is some institution, there's even if it is autocratic and not, and there are resources that if, you can sort of still stem the degradation. Here, there are no resources, and degradation is picking up pace.
Yeah. Last question on Pakistan before we sort of turn to some other parts of the Muslim world. Obviously, there's so much water under the bridge between India and Pakistan, not least of which is, Muslim versus Hindu. And I mean, we could go on forever about why the division, why partition happened. And I don't want to go there per se, but the only thing I want to ask is, isn't this India's problem ultimately? If India is going to be this great geopolitical power and be self-reliant and do all these things that it's talking about, doesn't India sort of have to solve this problem? Because India is really no other great power in the world or aspiring great power in the world, whether you're Brazil or Turkey or China, like nobody else has a country with 200 million people with nuclear weapons that is your sworn enemy on the border that you don't talk to, you don't really have relations with. So isn't it India's problem? And is there really anything India can do here?
It is India's problem. If you look at it empathetically, put yourself in the shoes of the Indians, this is a nightmare scenario. Here you are trying to be, the fifth largest economy of the world, emerging as a geoeconomic power, and you have problems with the Chinese. You're trying to maintain, an independent foreign policy while you're aligning more and more with the United States, and you've got your own problems. I mean, the world is a complicated place in which you are emerging. And next door, you have this state that is committing geopolitical suicide. And you are looking at this and saying, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? The reality is there's not much the Indians can do about it. What are they? They can hope for the best. Then there's the other complication, which is that right now, Pakistan is tanking, but India also is turning into, or has turned into, what many would call a majoritarian democracy and a liberal democracy, where you have the rise of right-wing Hindu nationalism. That, and between Pakistan's problems, and then beyond Pakistan lies the scary emirate of the Taliban. So this is a contiguous landmass that has problems. So in the entire sort of western flank of India is mired into uncertainty, to say the least, if not outright crisis and conflict. So it's how do the Indians deal with this? Will depend a lot upon how the Pakistanis deal with their own situation. Because at the end of the day, India has to deal with whoever is in power in Pakistan. Can the military, and that is one of the problems. The end of the Musharraf era proved one thing, that the military, his ability to hit reset and, keep its dominant position in the political economy is waning. And this experiment, that has exploded in the face of the military, experiment called Imran Khan, is further, if you will, highlighting that dilemma, that you don't have a political system that can function and you can't have the military come in and hit the reset button, because it doesn't have the reset button anymore. This situation can't be reset, and there's just so many stakeholders now. One of the reasons why Imran Khan was arrested by paramilitary forces is because the courts were giving him a pass. It's not that they gave him a pass after he was arrested, but they were giving him a pass because that's just the way the legal system works. Just because there's a politician that you don't like and is not doing the kind of things that you want him to do, or is threatening your interests, you just can't lock him up. So, there is democracy in Pakistan. There's a democratic side to Pakistan, but then there is also this autocratic side to Pakistan, and those two universes aren't able to coexist anymore. And the coexistence was there because the military kind of maneuvered and engineered, because the civilian space was weak. Pakistan was a much different country in decades past. There weren't a whole lot of people to begin with. The dollar was not at 300 rupees. The Pakistani currency hadn't devalued. The economic situation was far better. We did not have social media, and just the level of public frustration wasn't there. So now all of this is happening. What are the Indians supposed to do? I mean, they just have to hope. They can hope that, hey, in the end, this doesn't completely go out of hand, and there's some method to the madness.
Well, on that uplifting note, why don't we turn to the South Caucasus? You were the one who said, as we were talking before we got on the podcast, that you wanted to talk about the South Caucasus. There's a lot going on there. There's, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh. This is one of the areas where Russia's lack of success in Ukraine creates a power vacuum, because Russia used to be the dominant power here. Now Turkey and Iran and other powers are seeking to push their influence into this area. So what is happening in the South Caucasus that catches your eye that we should be telling the listeners about?
I think that we're not paying enough attention to the South Caucasus because of not just the Russian weakness, but also because Azerbaijan, and this is before the Ukraine war, December of 2020, was able to radically alter the balance of power in Nagorno-Karabakh and by extension the broader South Caucasus, by taking large chunks of Nagorno-Karabakh from the Armenians, helped by the Turks. And so that was a game changer. It signified that Russian influence isn't what it used to be. And the Turks saw the opportunity. They helped them with military and intelligence means, and they enabled the victory that the Azerbaijanis got over their historic rivals, the Armenians. What that does is, not only does it show that Russia is not an influence there, and then you have the added effect of Russia's dismal performance in Ukraine. So you have that dynamic happening. Armenia and can no longer rely on Russia, because although if you read today's papers, apparently Kremlin has invited both the Azerbaijani president, Mr. Aliyev, and Mr. Pashinyan, the Armenian prime minister, to come and for negotiations. But the reality is that the Russians can't shape the outcome of that region. Turkey is, as you said, has punched into what was clearly a Russian sphere of influence. But then there's also the southern border, which is, in my opinion, far more interesting. I think that the Russians have realized that they need to focus on Ukraine, and if they need to fix the situation for themselves in Ukraine. And if they can't do that, then the South Caucasus is also going to become a problem for them. So the order of priority over there is Ukraine first, then South Caucasus. In fact, South Caucasus and the North Caucasus depends on the outcome of the Ukraine conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So Russia is not paying attention beyond saying, hey, come, we'll mediate and you can have, we'll have dinner together and tea and whatnot and drinks and we'll talk about this. That's the extent. But what's really happening now, because of the weakening of Russian influence, is that Azerbaijan now has a much longer border with Iran. Those territories that were under the control of the Armenians, they've been taken over by Azerbaijan, and this is a problem for the Iranians. And at a time when Iran is going through its own, historic evolution, and the state is weakened, the protests seem to have died down for now, but the sentiment isn't going away. We've talked about, you and I, in previous podcasts about how the internal regime evolution is at an inflection point. So it comes as there's all of this in the South Caucasus on Iran's northern flank comes at a very bad time for the Iranians. Now, the key here is to realize that ethnic Azeris who live and straddle that border with Azerbaijan and the South Caucasus form Iran's largest minority, 25 to 30% ethnic Azeris. This terrifies the IRGC and the regime as a whole, because they're weak right now, and if somehow looking at their co-ethnic brothers north of the border succeeding, and then seeing the regime weaken, will there be a rising amongst ethnic Azeris who are Iranian citizens? And what does that do to the regime? The other thing here is that until now, the legitimacy, or sort of the glue with which the Islamic Republic held all of its minorities, perhaps no more than 55% of all Iranians can claim Persian heritage, ethnic heritage. Persianate by culture and language. But there are large minorities. We just mentioned the Azeris. There's the Balochis in the southeast. You have in the southwest the Ahwazi Arabs. You have Kurds, who are straddled between the Azeri population and the Iraqi border. And these are vested populations. Until, for the longest time, you held all of this together through the glue of Islam, because this is an Islamic republic. It's a theocracy, a theocratic, parliamentary republic hybrid, weird hybrid, but you got along. You were getting by. Now that the people are completely done with the theocracy, there's no patience for it, and we're seeing the rise of the IRGC trying to hold things together and have, or at least effect a soft landing for the regime once Khamenei is no more. The question of the minorities comes up. I mean, so if Islam is going to be somehow replaced with Iranian nationalism, then what about these sub-nationalisms? And what is they'll demand their share of power. If this is going to be, if Islam is no longer the thing, and which is no longer, because people do not subscribe, and one has to wonder, to what extent, even in the best days of the Islamic Republic, were all these minorities subscribing to the national narrative, which was so heavily, rooted in theocracy, Shiite Islamist theocracy. If that's no longer the case, then these people want a share of their power. How will the regime deal with that? So I think we're looking at a north-south, reality dynamic emerging in the South Caucasus. It's not just, we're looking at the South Caucasus. The Turks are looking at South Caucasus. The Azerbaijanis are looking at the South Caucasus as sort of this corridor by which you could have this, east-west trade, the Trans-Caspian corridor, or otherwise known as the Middle Corridor. That's the frame that they're looking at. They're looking at bypassing, Russia and asserting their sovereignty even more with Russia weakening. But what about the southern flank, where you have a major state like Iran in evolution? How does that? This is a transnational problem. Mind you, that it was as recent as the mid 1800s that the Russians took the South Caucasus from the Persians. So what I'm saying is that we're at a historic moment here that is unfolding. Which way the chips fall is anybody's guess, but I'm trying to highlight something that I see as really, really dramatic and potentially game-changing for the region.
Kamran, there are many reasons I love you, and chief among them is the fact that for you, the mid-1800s is extremely recent. But I have a bunch of different thoughts that I want to throw in there. The first is that I don't think Nagorno-Karabakh and all these Azeris and all these terms that are probably confusing to a lot of listeners who haven't spent time thinking about this. You might think this is just sort of two nerds geeking out about geopolitics, but this is actually very significant to global supply chains and even to global markets. On the CI Knowledge platform, we actually put out a report a couple months ago about how, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, if you look at air freight routes in the world, they actually have to go on a pretty narrow route that goes through Azerbaijan. So if you had a kinetic conflict in this part of the world, you would see air freight routes really start to shut down, and you would have a lot of bottlenecks that would come up that you wouldn't really be able to solve, because with Russia-Ukraine, if something happens here, it's actually a choke point that you should be thinking about in those terms. So this has broader import in general. The notion of Iranian nationalism, that almost sounds almost like an oxymoron to me, Kamran, because the great history of Iran and of Persia is that the way it gets all of these populations around it to quote unquote submit is that it lets them do their own thing. That's sort of what made the great Persian empires of the past. They would give a certain amount of independence and autonomy to local populations, understanding that Iran, the center, was where economic prosperity was located. And I get the sense Iran can't really make that argument today because there is no economic prosperity in Iran. It's a pariah state. They've isolated themselves. There's no nuclear deal. If you're an Azeri living in Iran, Azerbaijan probably looks like a much more modern, much more advanced, a much greater financial economic opportunity there in general. And it also struck me the way you talked about this, looking east-west and trans-Caspian. Just today, we're recording on Thursday, May 18th, there's this report about the Russians and the Iranians agreeing to build a rail link as the Russians try and establish this north-south corridor through Iran to the Persian Gulf and get access to, the world's oceans. That seems asinine to me, the idea that Russia's suddenly going to let bygones be bygones with this historical rival in Iran, and it's going to be able to project power, not just in the South Caucasus, but through Iran on a rail link that's going to get all the way to the Persian Gulf. I just don't know what the decision makers in the Kremlin are smoking right now. But those are just some thoughts based on what you said. But I thought I would ask, and you can tie this back to sort of the broader points. There was that very strange report, or that very strange development in January, where the Azerbaijani embassy in Iran was attacked, and people died in that attack in general. And it seemed to really cause a diplomatic problem between Iran and Azerbaijan. And it hasn't really gone anywhere since then. I was actually sort of expecting things to get worse, and it's just gotten very quiet. Do you have any insight about what that particular thing was about? And then sort of zooming out from that, you talked about Iran and maybe Iran coming apart at the seams, but let's say the supreme leader passes away in the next couple of years and the IRGC takes control. Are you also raising the possibility of a conflict between Azerbaijan and Iran, where Iran might actually want to get involved here and sort of reassert itself in the South Caucasus? Because that sounds awfully dire to me.
So a great question. So that was a weird incident where this person came in and shot up, people at the Azerbaijani embassy in Tehran. It really, really Baku and Tehran relations were never good, and so the Iranians, for offensive and defensive purposes, for the longest time, for decades, tried to export, their revolutionary ideas, trying to leverage the fact that 65% of all Azerbaijani nationals are of Shia persuasion from a sectarian point of view, trying to push those theocratic, radical Islamist Shia views. in a society that was otherwise secular, and that really created problems. And this was done right after the implosion of the Soviet Union, and it was an opportunity that the Iranians saw. They were successful. There was pushback, but part of it has to do with the fact that an independent Azerbaijan and you're on your northern flank. When it was the Soviet Union, when it was the Russian Empire, it didn't really matter. They handed over, in the Treaty of Gulistan and the Turkmenche in the 1800s. The Persians handed this territory, over to the Russians and said, "Hey, we're done," after having controlled it for centuries. But now that Azerbaijan becomes independent, and you have an ethnic Azeri population that is, not exactly well knit into the theocracy that is the Islamic Republic, then therefore it's also a defensive measure to go and promote your own. You're trying to insulate yourself, say, okay, if Azerbaijanis are experimenting or dabbling in our ideology, then that insulates our population from the reverse effect of secular ethno-nationalism being, cultivated or promoted. So this is something that's been happening for a long time. After that embassy incident, the suspicions and that acrimonious relationship just spiked. Both sides have expelled diplomats in recent months. First, it was the Azerbaijanis, and followed by the Iranians. And there's been an incident in which an MP in Azerbaijan there was an assassination attempt on him, which the Azerbaijanis have, indirectly accused the Iranians of trying to engineer. So relations are bad. The IRGC and the regular armed forces have done exercises on that border ever since the turn of events in Nagorno-Karabakh in late 2020. So yes, I am saying that the likelihood of conflict between Azerbaijan and Iran is growing. I'm not ready to predict that it will happen, but the probability is rising given everything that's happening both north of that frontier and south of that frontier. The conditions are conducive, unless there's some form of an arrangement that assumes that both sides can reach an understanding, and therefore, we're looking at a potential conflict here. Hopefully, I'm proven wrong.
I can't imagine that Azerbaijan would be willing to go this route unless it either had ironclad promises of support from Turkey or ironclad promises of support from the United States. So is Azerbaijan drinking its own Kool-Aid, or does it feel like it has a security patron that is going to have its back if it wants to take on an actor like Iran in the region?
So I don't think the Azerbaijanis are looking for a fight. I don't think that they're, going to go in and initiate one. I think they're going to be defensive. If you're Azerbaijan, it's like Turkey and Syria. If you're Azerbaijan and south of your border there's commotion and the regime is in flux, what does that mean for your side of the border? Are ethnic Azeris going to come in as refugees? I'm just throwing out a hypothetical scenario here. That they will have to react to that. There's also the fear that, and this is what the Azerbaijanis feel, and my conversations with their senior officials, they say that, maybe the Iranians become so threatened by what has happened that they initiate a conflict. So then what do we do? Plus, you have to understand that there is an Israeli factor in all of this.
Yeah.
Azerbaijan just opened up its embassy after having decades of diplomatic relations, but no actual embassy in Tel Aviv. They opened their embassy a few months ago. And that's not the only place where the Israelis have opened an embassy, where there's growing diplomatic relations between Israel and the northern neighbor of Iran. The Israelis have opened an embassy in Turkmenistan in recent weeks as well. So
have they? I missed did they have a party DJ'd by Gurbanguly himself, or did they let the Israelis DJ the party?
I think that the foreign minister, Mr. Cohen, was there for that. If I remember the reports accurately. So, but
you just made my day. Listeners, if you're not aware, Turkmenistan is really the weirdest country in the entire world. Go onto YouTube and just search Gurbanguly New Year's Eve DJ. You'll thank me later. But sorry, Kamran, go on.
No worries. So you have a situation where there's enough there to frighten the Iranians. You have pressure from the Israelis. The Israelis are now tightening relations on your northern flank. Your old ally, Russia, that you've been relying on as a tool through which you could manage relations with the U.S., is itself mired in a major problem. This is a new world for the Iranians. They're suddenly feeling very lonely. And China isn't ready to jump in. Why would they? And so you have to fend for yourself. And in times like these, there are miscalculations, bad decisions. So what I'm trying to say here is that where the conditions, again, inside Iran, on its northern flank, globally speaking, are as such that it increases the likelihood of a conflict between Baku and Tehran.
Kamran, I could talk to you forever, and I wanted to talk about Central Asia, but honestly, I don't want to do it. I don't want to shortchange it because it's such a big issue. So my instinct is maybe we'll have you back on and we will just do a Central Asia episode. But before I let you go, just your quick take on Turkey's elections and what the result means for the future of the Turkish Republic. Take that question in any direction that you want.
So I think, look, clearly Erdogan's best days are behind him. I think I said this in one of your shows earlier as well. I still hold to that opinion because if Erdogan has to go into round 2 to win an election, that's not very, that shows that he's not as popular as he used to be. It was easy for him to breeze through and get the 50%. And, it was like a given that, hey, who can defeat Erdogan? And despite the fact that he actually had his main rival, the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Imamoglu, disqualified. Yes. And Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is not exactly a very, very charismatic politician. He's more of a compromised figure for the combined opposition. And yet, he polled 45% of the vote. And we need to go into a second round. Shows that Mr. Erdogan's his influence and his popularity isn't what it used to be. Now, does that mean he's going to...
Kamran, it was not 45, it was 49.5. So he almost got to 50.
Yes, but he had 45. I'm talking about Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, who got close to 40.
I thought you meant Erdogan.
Yeah, and so, but I'm not saying Erdogan can't win. He will likely win again because in the second round. But that doesn't change the fact that his problems are still there. His best days are behind him. He's somehow not going to win again and turn Turkey around. And so I think that this doesn't change much for the overall trajectory of Mr. Erdogan and his popularity. And if he wins again, then that's going to create more public ire. And people are going to get more frustrated. And if half the country is frustrated with you, it's not a really good situation to be in. Yes, you can, you can go to Mr. Inge and got 5.3 or something % of the vote and say, hey, I'll offer you a cabinet position. Why don't you, step down in my favor and have all your voters vote for me so I can get passed in the second round on May 28th. That is very likely. That doesn't solve the problem, nor does it change the fact that you are still a weak president, even if you somehow manage to get reelected.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kamran, we'll call it there and we'll have you back on hopefully in the next couple of weeks and we will do an entire episode just on Central Asia because I know it's a topic that's dear to your heart. It's dear to mine. We just did a long sort of deep dive on Uzbekistan here on the podcast series 2. So, and I know that you're bound for Tashkent soon. So thank you for making the time and we'll have you back on very soon to pick up where we left off to talk about Central Asia.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.